Hi, I'm Tom Patterson with Flying, talking with Richard Meikle, Executive Vice President, Safety and Regulatory Compliance at Flight Safety International. Richard, thank you for taking time to join us today. I know you're a pilot who's type rated in a wide variety of business and commercial aircraft. Could you share with us a little history about your path to aviation and how you were drawn to be a pilot and then how that led to your role at Flight Safety International?
Yeah, first, thanks for having us, Tom. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I actually grew up in Australia, so I have an Australian pilot certificate. My dad probably took the most expensive yacht trip he's ever taken in his life one time because he went sailing. They got caught behind an island out in Bass Strait in the southern portion of Australia, which all the yachts started running out of food because the weather was so bad. And he said, charter an airplane, come down, pick me up. And so off we went. And actually, we were going to drop food off for them. And so we chartered on the way down. The pilot let me fly for about 15 minutes or so. And that's where it all began. So I went from there to San Francisco, flew for a corporation out of there for about 5 years. Then went to Minneapolis for 5 years, flew a commuter there, and then ended up at NetJets in Columbus, Ohio for 25 years, where I ran the safety department for the last 16 before joining flight safety a year and a half ago.
That has got to be one of the most interesting aviation, how I got there stories that I've heard in a while. Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to talk about with you today was to learn more about the partnership between Flight Safety International and GE Digital. I'm interested in learning how that partnership uses actual flight data as a tool during training to reduce flight risks. Could you describe
Yeah.
that a little bit for us?
Yeah, of course. And first, I mean, we're tremendously excited about this partnership. As most people saw, we announced it last week at MBAA. And having run the safety department for a safety department for 16 years and implementing FOQA, we saw the value of that program very, very quickly. And FOQA gives you so much insight as to how the airplanes are being operated and where margins are being eroded, albeit slightly in some cases, or maybe they're identifying hazards that you just don't even see. You have a bit of a blind spot to them. So we started the conversation with GE about 4 months ago, 3 months ago. And the initial concept was that we were going to be consumers of the data and that we would do the analysis ourselves. And very quickly, GE proposed a solution, which I think is perfect. I mean, really, it's the ideal marriage. They said, look, let us be your data analysts. And they're the experts. They are the world leader at doing this type of flight data analysis. So it made perfect sense to take the data that they're collecting and analyzing and identifying those hotspots in the industry and things that are hurting people. And then for us to be the training delivery arm to counteract those hazards that are out there. So a very simple example would be runway excursions. One of the number one causes of accidents and incidents in the industry, often it is a result of, shall we say, less than precise delivery of the airplane to the runway threshold and then to touchdown. So the FOQA data will really give you some great insight into that as to what's the typical touchdown point, what's the typical crossing speed across the threshold. Perhaps its crew members are concerned about flying the airplane at VREF. And so by us really illustrating that in the training and building a scenario that is focused on that, we can weave that concept into the training and therefore eliminate the hazard. There could be aircraft specific issues too. For example, wingtip strike, tail strike, those types of things on particular geometry airplanes. But if you don't actually have the strike, which of course nobody wants to have, you really don't know how close to the strike you were because it was just wow, that was kind of felt weird, but there's no damage to the airplane. So without having that insight, and the data will tell you how close that airplane is coming under what conditions with that particular model, and we can train that out. Same thing, there may be an airport issue. It could be a particularly challenging departure procedure or arrival procedure, and we can incorporate that into a training scenario again. So there's so many ways that we can do this, and it really is truly a beautiful partnership where GE is the guiding light, so to speak, in the data, and we are the training delivery arm to support that data and make the corrective actions. It's perfect.
I'm told that this program is unique in the business aviation industry. What is it precisely that sets it apart?
Yeah, so it's really it's the perfect marriage, like I say, of the virtual and the real and the real world. So GE has in their program, the GE digital program, or the C-Focal program, has over 1,000 corporate operations and corporate aircraft, I should say, 300 operators. So that represents opportunity for people that cannot stand up a focal program themselves. Maybe they just don't have the resources to do it, or maybe the airplane's not even equipped. They shouldn't miss the safety opportunity to enhance training or enhance safety just because that particular airplane that they may have purchased, some years ago didn't have that equipment in it. And we can build this in. GE's got extensive experience over the years of the airlines doing this through the FOCA program. But this is the first of its kind in the corporate FOCA world. And so, again, we can take the lessons learned, and it may not be specific to that particular airplane. In some cases, it will. But either way, the lessons learned from the data can be applied across all of the training platforms that we have so that anybody really benefits from this. And we can, as a whole, increase the safety margins across the industry.
So I have to ask, what was sort of the driver behind the idea to pursue this idea for combining data and training?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we stood the FOCA program up at my last employer, and we learned very, very quickly there are things that you just don't see in day-to-day operations without being able to download data, and without being able to see it. If you're not measuring it, you're not controlling it. So, and that's really what this is the driver here. So we can download the data, we can look at it, we can identify that hotspot, and we can target the areas that are hurting people in the industry. I mean, runway excursions, high altitude or low altitude for that matter, loss of control in flight. So think of Air France 447 is obviously a well-known accident where the aircraft was stalled. Now, the onset to the stall was different to some of the other scenarios, but there have been plenty of instances in history where airplanes have got very slow at altitude. China Airlines 6, I think, is a good example where it was coming across the Pacific. A 747 SP had an engine failure, and they got very, very slow, and to the point where the airplane actually stalled. And those are graphic examples because we knew the airplane stalled. But there are many, many occurrences that are going on unreported because the crew caught it before it escalated to that point. But the precursor conditions are things that we can set up in the simulator, and we can build that into a training scenario so that people learn that lesson in the simulator versus in the airplane. That's just one example of many. I mean, there's so many we could talk through, but it's all about making pilots better overall. And I think the other thing I would just add to that is there's a mindset over in the industry that training has historically been a regulatory event. What is it that pilots come to training for? Is generally speaking, a lot of them view it as, look, I've got to go check the regulatory boxes so that I can continue to fly and make my money and go home and support my family. The reality is that was regulatory training with some safety elements weaved into it or woven into it. What we're doing is transitioning that mindset to this is safety-based training that will meet the regulatory requirements. There's no question about that. But the focus has to be on safety. It has to be on getting better every single time you show up. And so that's really the primary driver. It's just how do we make people better than what they were before? I mean, we did a great job before this data started being available to us, but it's going to be even better. I mean, it's so exciting. I mean, I'm sure you can tell.
What are the benefits of this program for each company? And also, can you tailor the benefits for each customer as well?
Yeah, so any customer that's running a FOCA program or identifies a hazard in their operation can certainly come to us before training and say, look, we're going into this particular airport. This is a challenge for us because of X, Y, or Z, whatever that is. Maybe it's a private ranch. Maybe it's a public use airport. It doesn't matter. With enough lead time on that, if we've got the visuals available in the simulator, we can certainly build a scenario around that. Under the right circumstances, we can go build the visuals. There's a lot of benefit from that perspective for the customer and the individual pilots that they're sending to come and train with us. So they really do build that targeted training. If you think about an airline pilot, for example, they have a pretty confined network of where they're operating to. It's, the hub plus whatever airports that particular airplane that they are operating services. So long range airplane goes to international destinations, and they may go to 3, 4, 5 on that particular airframe. Corporate pilots go to thousands of airports based on wherever the charter or the boss or whoever it is saying, let's go. And it may be that even then you're going to the same airport, but you're approaching it from a completely different direction. Coming to Aspen, for example, is very different coming from the east versus the south versus the north and the west. So understanding how to approach that and mitigate the risk ahead of time and having visibility to that. And one of the things that the GE partnership is going to allow us to do is have insight to traffic flows into airports so you can see what's the most likely pattern to come in there. Another huge thing that is really, really powerful is the ability to build specific RNAV, charted visual flight procedures, so that you're going into an airport like Sedona, Arizona, runway 21 into Sedona, a tough runway to get into. As you're on downwind, you've got a lot of high terrain around. It's daunting, and you generally want to give yourself a fair amount of margin on that terrain. But in doing so, you tend to lose sight of the airport. And so by building an RNAV visual, you can actually use defined waypoints that will avoid all of that terrain, but put you on a nice, stable approach. So when you roll onto final, the runway's right in front of you. You're in the right stable conditions, so you're not set up for a problem before you even get to final approach. It's a really nice balance of the two, data source and training delivery on them.
So you've got a brand new program here. How are you planning to measure success for the program?
So GE Digital and us will be meeting very frequently. Our current plan is about quarterly. We're going to at least start off with quarterly, where we're going to sit down and identify what are the new hotspots that are in the industry. We're going to then set safety performance indicators associated with those. So that will be things like perhaps we want to have a runway threshold crossing speed, a tighter margin on that. And so we say, okay, we want to see that between +5 and -3 or 4 knots or whatever that is. And we'll define that as that's our objective. And then we'll try and train that into the performance of the pilots that are coming through training. And overall, that should start to show up in the data as they fly more and more flights. So we'll be establishing goals on a quarterly basis. And then the objective here is that every time a pilot comes through training, they will see new and fresh data. The last thing we want to do is show them the same thing they saw last time they came through. So, we really we were actually discussing this very topic yesterday, is what's that frequency and that we swap out. We don't want to go too early for fear that somebody will miss it. And then we also don't want to go too late for fear that somebody will see it twice. So we're thinking right around that 5-month point is the sweet spot, where if we, somebody may come a month early, but they'll, it's less likely than not that they will see it twice. So.
We only have a couple of minutes left, but I didn't want to let you go without asking you about the fact that this is the second major partnership that your organization has done in recent months. Does this signal a change in philosophy for Flight Safety International?
Yeah, I think it does, Tom. So as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about this whole philosophy of regulatory versus safety-based training. As you mentioned, a second partnership was with Flight Research on upset recovery training. So, we've had an upset recovery course in the simulators for many years, but there's something about staring at a face full of ground as you're coming out of an inverted stall. That was one of my favorite maneuvers, when they said they put the airplane upside down about 30 degrees above the horizon in a stalled condition, and then said fly the airplane. But there is something about that G-force and something about that visual motivator that is really powerful. That said, there are things you just simply cannot do in the airplane safely, such as a very low altitude stall or a very high altitude stall, where you may run into high traffic and damage to the engines and those types of things. So absolutely, the philosophy here is, again, let's attack the safety issues, and the regulatory pieces will fall into play if we build those scenarios appropriately. But it's absolutely got to be the core feature of our training is safety first. Regulatory will follow.
Outstanding. Congratulations on the new program. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us about it. Richard Meikle of Flight Safety International. And thank you for watching. I'm Tom Patterson for Flying.